My name is Jim Turk, and I'm the director of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University. I'd like to welcome you tonight to the second in the Center for Free Expression series on threats to press freedom. We began our first episode focusing on Kashmir. Tonight, we are turning to Afghanistan. Before going further, though, I want to acknowledge that the land on which the Center for Free Expression is located is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I'd also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I also would like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event, who are the Canadian Association of Journalists, the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, PEN Canada, and World Press Freedom Canada. Thank you to all four of your organizations. The title for tonight's event is Afghanistan, the War Against Journalists. The Afghan War is one of the longest running wars, or was one of the longest running wars in world history. And during that war, journalists faced kidnappings and killings while combating propaganda on all sides to get at the truth of the tragedy that was unfolding. And despite that, and during that period, there was a flowering of independent media and a new prominence for women journalists. But that's all changed with the Taliban's return to power, with the return of censorship and beatings, imprisonment, and closures. Many, especially women, have been forced to flee while others continue to fight on. In today's panel, we're going to talk about what happened, what's the future of media freedoms in Afghanistan, and what can be done to help its journalists. I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have for tonight's panel, and it's quite a remarkable group of journalists, and we're honored to have them with us today. The first is Shakor Kamran. Shakor is an award-winning investigative journalist from the Paktia province in Afghanistan. Over his decade-long career, he has reported for various broadcast and digital media organizations, including Pajhwok, Internews, Madar, and served as head of the Committee to Protect Afghan Journalists in the southeastern zone of Afghanistan. Shakor also, after the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan in 2021, was forced to leave the country. But he continues his work in support of girls' education in his home province. Welcome, Shakor. Our second panelist is Makia Munir. Makia worked for our Radio Television Afghanistan, the Pajhwok Afghan News Agency, Internews, and Voice of America as a reporter, editor, news manager, and trainer. She is a member of the Afghan Journalists Federation and director of the Women's Journalist Coordination Center. Welcome, Makia. If you could unmute your camera so the audience can see you, that would be great. Hi, Makia, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Thanks.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our third panelist, I'm just naming as Mohammed. We're not showing his name nor his identity to protect his safety and that of his family. Mohammed served as a fixer for major international media for many years in Afghanistan, including the Toronto Globe and Mail. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you.
And fourthly, I'd like to introduce Rachel Pulford. Rachel is executive director of the Journalists for Human Rights, Canada's media development organization. She has led a JHR since 2011. In that time, the organization has mentored and trained approximately 10,000 journalists on 4 continents. Previously, Rachel was a print reporter and a magazine journalist, and in 2009-10, she was the Webster McConnell Fellow at Massey College at the University of Toronto. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Jim. Great to be here.
And this wonderful panel has a distinguished moderator who's coordinating our series, and that's Julian Scher. Julian was senior producer at CBC's Fifth Estate. He served as an investigative journalist with the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail. He's the author of 6 widely acclaimed books and is working on his 7th as we speak. He's filmed, written, and produced major documentaries around the globe and covered scandals, wars, and corporate intrigue in Afghanistan, amongst many other countries. He's also the winner and 3-time nominee for Gemini, Canada's equivalent to Emmys for TV. He's the recipient of the Governor General's Award for Meritorious Public Service for uncovering miscarriages of justice. He's trained journalists in Canada, the United States, around the world, including Afghanistan. And last Monday, Julian's documentary, Ghosts of Afghanistan, won the top award for the best documentary at the Canadian Screen Awards, Canada's equivalent to the Emmys and Oscars, and also won the awards for best editing and best writing. A remarkable honor, Julian. We're really grateful to have you with us and are happy with the opportunity to celebrate this wonderful achievement for your documentary, Ghosts of Afghanistan. And if members of the audience haven't seen it, I'd encourage them to Google it and find a way to see where they can do it. So welcome to all of you. Now, the format for—
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The format for today's panel is that Julian is going to moderate a conversation amongst the panelists for about 45 minutes. And after that, they're going to turn to questions from the audience. So if you could look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says Q&A. So anytime you want to ask a question, simply click on that button and type out your question or write out your question, and do it as you're listening to the panel discussion. Don't wait till they're done and we turn to the audience. Anytime a question comes to mind, please just write it down there. And then when Julian turns to the audience after about 45 minutes, he will ask Ange Holmes, who's the coordinator for the Center for Free Expression, to read out the first question. Then the panelists will have a chance to answer it, and then he'll ask for the next question, and so on. So that's all from me. Over to all of you. I'm really looking forward to your conversation.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. We've got audience members, not only here in Canada, but from North America and all through Europe, and I'm sure in and around Afghanistan. Obviously, the world's attention right now is focused on the horrible things that are happening in the war in Ukraine, but we shouldn't forget the world's longest running war was the war in Afghanistan. I had the honor and privilege of going to Afghanistan 3 times, and you're going to hear from 3 amazing journalists who have risked their lives in the stories that Makia, Shakor, and Mohammed. And they have amazing stories to tell about their lives, the friends and families that they left behind. So we're going to get right to their stories. We're going to start. Everybody has heard, I think, as Jim explained, some of the challenges going on right now, the arrests, the disappearances, the censorship. I'm in constant contact with some of my friends and journalists who are facing risks under the Taliban right now. But we're going to start 20 years ago. We're going to start when the American-led invasion started in 2001, and we're going to find out from our journalists what was it like in those 20 years covering the war, and you're going to hear some amazing stories. And then we're going to, our second part, we're going to look at what happened last August when the Taliban swept back into power, and why did our 3 guests feel they had no choice but to flee. And we'll bring in Rachel, who will talk about what Canadian journalists and journalists around the world did to try to save and help some of our colleagues. And then finally, of course, we'll look at the future. Where do we go from here? So let's start right away. Let's time travel a bit. There's a lot of bad things happening now, but I'm going to start with Shakor, who's one of our veteran journalists. And Shakor, you were an investigative journalist for many years. Tell us the kinds of stories that you covered in the last 20 years. Give our audience a sense of the kind of stories, especially about corruption that you covered and the kinds of threats that you faced, not just from the Taliban. Over to you, Shakor. Whoop. Shakor, you've muted yourself and lost your image. There you go.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
No problem. So tell us about your beginnings as a journalist and some of the amazing stories of corruption and wrongdoing that you uncovered.
Excuse me, may I have you again?
Yeah, just tell us about your stories that you did as a young journalist before the Taliban came back to power. Tell us some of the stories you did, the stories you did about corruption and wrongdoing. What was the journalism you did as an investigative journalist in the last years?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello to you, guests and participants, and I'm here today, and thank you for creating this opportunity. First of all, I want to describe the issue of the Taliban. I think lots of all of the guests and participants here all heard about the Taliban. The name of Afghanistan has long been associated with the name of the war, which for about more than 25 years is mostly related to the Taliban. And I want to say briefly about the Taliban, if you want, in that who are the Taliban, just briefly, because participants have heard the name of them, but I wanna they will hear this name as well here today in this program. So the Taliban who are mainly based in more than 25,000 madrasas in Pakistan, which are supported by the thousands of children and teenagers to these madrasas schools every year in the name of the religious education. But they give them extremist thinking and education, and when they are grow up, they use them as terrorists for their purpose, for their own purpose. So now I came to the question that stories I make as a reporter, and before I actually started working as a reporter, I had thought about some of the potential problems and challenge, but when I actually started, I realized that the challenge, the problem was not one from the one side, and I think there were three dimensions. The problems were from three dimensions. As I said, the first direction was the Taliban terrorist group, which did not and doesn't value anything in is very brutal. And the second one is the corruption and the mafia that was inside the government or was somehow the mafia that was inside the government or was somehow related to it. So my report was about the yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I first encountered threats from the members of the parliament and some of their gunmen because I had reports of their corruption and land grabbing, even until they filed a lawsuit against me at the Afghan Attorney General's office and wanted to target me in other ways, in sometimes practical experience or lessons. You know, the practical experiences or lessons that cannot be learned in any book or university. But I became cautious after this and took more safety precautions for myself.
Please.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Please.
Well,
Excuse me, I have here some.
sure, looks like he has a family issue or something. The point I just want to make about what Shakor just said towards the end is that it's important to realize that back then, for most of the time, journalists like Shakor were focusing on what he called the mafia, the corruption inside the Afghan government and in Afghan businesses. He spent, and most of the reporters spent, a lot of their time uncovering the problems of the government, and they faced tremendous repression. This was not the Taliban. This was the Western supported government. Let's turn to Makia. Makia, you worked for many, many organizations, and you're also, of course, involved in the Afghan Journalist Federation. But tell us especially how exciting it was for you to see women take their place as journalists from 2001 until recently. Talk about the role of you and women as journalists in Afghanistan.
Thank you. I must say, when I started my work as a journalist in Afghanistan, there was just one media in Afghanistan and 2 or 3 print media. In 2002, I started when the Taliban left the Kabul. There was a lot of women that working in the national TV and radio, but after that, in 20 years, a lot of women working in different side of media as a journalist, as a producer, director, and other posts. But I appreciate to them because they faced a lot of problems at the society, at the office, with their families, because you know, Afghanistan is a traditional country, and everybody, some men don't want to work their daughters, their sisters, and women in the different media, especially in TV. And it's very difficult for us as a journalist, as a woman journalist. So we started our work in our traditional society that the men, some of men have closed minds, and they think about the woman, different think about the woman. It was very difficult, but the women struggled about all of them, and they working with a different media, print media, radio, and TV, and other social media. It was a good step for us, for all women, then they became to the media, and we witness that a lot of women working before the Taliban captured to Kabul in different media. It was a good step, and they faced with the different problems like their family. A big problem for them, their family. They faced this step. When they came had the society, other problems, the society was for them, were for them. They also stepped this, and they struggled with all of things, with all of types of males in the society. But unfortunately, we have good journalists, good reporters, good producers, and good staff, women staff, and different side and section of media. But unfortunately, we lost it in one day, in one night, when the Taliban captured Kabul. 80% of women journalists lost their jobs. And
Makia, I just want to, excuse me for interrupting. I want to hold off on that about what happened in that one day in August. Let's just stick for the moment in the before that happened. You talked about the resistance that many women journalists felt from their families. What kind of reception did you get from your male colleagues? You know, the men who were working with you, were they open to the strong role of women journalists in the new Afghanistan?
Yes. Some of our main work colleagues, I appreciate from them. They help us, but some of them don't help us. I say an example to you. When I became a news manager, some of my main colleagues didn't accept to me as a news manager. So they didn't want to say to that. I say to them, you work this issue and you work this reports and that report and harder to them. And it's shame from this. A woman be their director.
They didn't want you as their boss.
Yes, yes. It's very difficult for them. Every time they want to create problem for me. Some of my colleagues, it's witness if they hear this talking and this panel. But we struggle with all of these problems. My colleagues, some of my colleagues, the women journalists, beating their family them, and they said, don't go to the media, don't work into the media. It's shame for us that you go to the media and work there. There hasn't a good place for women. They have this mind and this idea with themselves. But it was a good for journalists that journalists show this today to do everything and in different side and section of media. The women journalists, I think the reports to do the journalists, the women journalists as a woman, for women, the men couldn't that because the women know the women problems in the society like Afghanistan and their problems in the different village, and there's victims that they did for their country and they lost their sons, their husband and others. So it was a good for all women journalists, and the women journalists could to do it very well, very good and better than others.
Okay, thanks, Makia. We'll come back, but I want to turn to Mohammed. It's important for people to understand that people like Makia and Shakor were Afghan journalists working for Afghan media, reporting in Dari or Pashtun to their audiences. But a very important role were played by people like Mohammed. Mohammed is what we call fixers. But they're more than that. These are researchers, journalists, interpreters who, when Western journalists like me come to Afghanistan, rely on people like Mohammed to guide us, to keep us safe, but especially to help us report, because it's not our country and they know the country, they know the people. I have had the pleasure of working with Mohammed in 2008, 2009, and in our documentary, Ghost of Afghanistan, which won the award. We couldn't have done it without people like Mohammed. So Mohammed, I want to ask you, what was it like for you in 2008, 2009, working for the Globe and Mail and other Western media? What was some of the fun? What was some of the excitement? But also tell us about some of the dangers and the trouble you got in.
Thank you, Julian, for asking the questions and giving time to me. Yeah, that's in last 15 years or more than 15 years, my work with the media. It's 99% with foreign media. I worked first. I started working 2006 in Kandahar. It was amazing for me to start work with Graham Smith. So that's he convinced me to do some interviews with the Taliban. So you know that's our society. We had relatives both sides, in government and Taliban side, and it was impossible to hide that I'm not a journalist because we needed to contact with the Taliban, with contact with the Afghan government, with the foreigners. This was our job. We had to do that. For this reason, so I contacted one of my villager. He was a big Talib commander. I convinced him to do an interview with Graham Smith. This was my first job and the first interview. It was a really dangerous day for me and amusing, and also that's a very important point in my job. So the person, the Talib commander, he was in Kandahar city. He recently escaped from Pajhwok battle, a big war between Canadian and Taliban. When I asked the commander, please speak with a foreign journalist, he said, what is your job? I said, recently I got the job with the journalist. He said, please not do work with the foreigners. They are not good people. I said, no, journalists are journalists. They are neutral. They are not with you, not with the foreigners, not with Afghan government. Indeed, your job is just to investigate the trap, to write the truth and give and send to the world. And after a long discussion, I convinced him, and he said, yes, I can do interview. So now we have to do interview. It is a very difficult decision because he was living in Kandahar city. His home was there. He was hide. He's scared from the government, maybe capture him, and also the foreigners. So after I told him that there is one small office, Graham Smith is there. We have to go there. I will pay for the taxi. I will take you there and bring you back. After he said, okay, no problem. We gone there. We did an interview with Graham Smith.
So you had to convince a Taliban commander, and this was like 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, to trust a Western journalist, to trust you. And of course it worked. The series, by the way, was called Talking with the Taliban. It was published in the Globe and Mail, and it caused a huge controversy because back then nobody was talking to the Taliban, and you and Graham Smith did a great job. Mohammed, could I ask you, you and Graham also landed up doing a lot of investigations into problems with the government and even with the Canadian Army. You exposed torture in the prisons where Canadian soldiers had handed over prisoners. Can you talk about what happened when you and Graham Smith and the Globe and Mail published those stories, making serious allegations of torture basically by the Afghan government? What were the consequences for you? Because you were taking on powerful people in Afghanistan. So tell us what happened.
Yeah, this is a big story. So I don't know that's which part of the story you need to tell you. That's how I can reach to the.
Well, maybe I think with the limited time, mainly I kind of summarized the story. The main thing is after the story came out, after it caused the scandal, you had proven that there was abuse and torture. What consequences did you face? What harassment did you face from the government and even from the Western armed forces? What happened to you?
Yeah, that's when the first we were doing interview with the Taliban, mostly, and also the local people with torture, got tortured by foreign soldiers and also Afghan government. So I did not know that it will have a big and dangerous sequences. So after when the first part of the story published in Canada, that's the uprising or the protests started in Ottawa. So one of my friend Javed, this is another Javed, not Juju. he was my colleague. Also, he was working with Global Mail. He told me, be careful about that. Not to do this kind of story, not work in that. I said, what's the problem? He said that the first part of the story published about the detainees, now the protests start in Ottawa, in Canada capital. So the Canadian government will be upset about that. And the Canadian troops will upset about that. Maybe you will lose the job. Maybe they will capture you. I said, oh, I don't know about that. So he said, be careful about that. I said, so what should I do? He said, sit in your home. And also you can go to Kabul and hide from yourself from there. I told him that there is no my name in the story because there is no my byline. No can find my byline. So he said, no, everyone knew you. But you walk and you enter the jail, the officials know about you. So please not to go around in the city. Yes, that's a month, roughly 1 month was dangerous for me. And also Asadullah Khalid told some journalist, who is this man that he's supporting Graham Smith and take him to the prison. So most of the journalists told him that we don't know him. We don't know that's this person. So this was, yeah.
So you got into a lot of trouble, and I believe you told me you were threatened with jail and other harassment from the government for what you were doing.
Not directly. No one told me that time. Not the government, not the foreign forces. Nothing I got from them. But it was possible. Maybe something will happen. But for some time I was hide.
You had to hide.
So hide, and the Graham Smith gone. And that time he had gone to Canada, and I was there in Kandahar. So for some time I was not working. So it was the government also, they left that issue.
So I hope, and aside from the communication problems, I hope the audience has got a sense that for 20 years, from 2001 till about 2021, people like Makia, who was fighting against traditional attitudes towards women in the media, but she was doing brave reports. Shakor was doing investigations into mafia type corruption. Mohammed was exposing torture and prisoner abuse and talking to the Taliban. They were doing tremendous work. Afghanistan was one of the most positive places in that region to see women on camera and great investigative reporting. But then, as Makia mentioned, August 15th, 2021, to the surprise of many, the Taliban sweep into Kabul and sweep back to power. And I'd like to hear from our three journalists very briefly, and then we'll turn to Rachel. What happened and why did you feel, and I know in some cases, some of you left before August 2021, why did you have to flee Afghanistan? So Shakor, let's start with you very briefly. You were a brave journalist, you had to stand up to the government, but why was the Taliban such a threat? So tell us when and how you had to flee Afghanistan. Go ahead, Shakor. Oh, Shakor, you have to turn on your camera and your microphone.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, very sorry about the network connection. I think it's the Wi-Fi have a little bit problem here.
So can you?
Are you hear me now?
Yeah, we could hear you good. Could you briefly, just in a few minutes, describe why you had to flee Afghanistan, when you fled, and what's happened to you?
I'm not agreed with the word flee. I think it should be used the migrant or changing or relocating our province because of the challenge that I was not able to be there, to stay there anymore because of my life safety or my immunity. As an investigative journalist, you know, the investigative reporting is one of the high risks. I think the level of the in journalism, as it have lots of importance. So it's have as hard as you can think about, especially in the area, in the place now where there is a war. So when I reported some issues like when Taliban when I mentioned in my reports that the Taliban were laying mines on public roads, blowing up bridges and bridge curve and barricades, and at the same time killing civilians. These issues become very noticeable and reactionary, which also drew the Taliban's attention to me and made them more angry on me. I reminded that the Taliban came from Pakistan and case insecurity and instability in southeast of Afghanistan, and also in some other parts of Afghanistan. And also in my two special investigative reports, I found that Taliban charge more than 500 million Afghanis a year to allow public works to operate, and that if either agency refused to pay them a percentage that Taliban asked them, they would not allow them to work, and they would come under their armed attack.
So you would expose, it's what we call extortion. This was like an extortion racket that the Taliban was running. This is what you exposed.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The second report was I reported that the saboteur group, had taken about 40 million Afghanis just to allow electricity dam to operate just in one project that called Machiavel electricity dam. The broadcast of these reports was no longer tolerable for them, and they asked me to interrogate them at a center which was located in a remote area under their 100% control. But that I had enough communications around, I was informed that they had a plan to imprison me and torture me. So I refused to go there because I know what will happen if I go there. And I could not go easy to my home after that because of the high level of security threats. By the time my home and my office were near to each other, about just 10 to 15 minutes walking away. But when these threats become so high, I wasn't able to go to my home in 2 months.
Wow. Shakor, just to be clear, I just want to be clear. Let me just, what year was this? What year did this happen?
Excuse me?
What year did this happen? When did this happen? Was this last year, 2021, 2020?
Yeah. It was 2020.
Right.
When I published these reports, and after that,
it's important for the audience to understand. So this is way before the Taliban returns. In 2020, you're exposing Taliban extortion, Taliban corruption. You get called to a meeting, but you know it's going to be dangerous for you. And so where do you decide to go? When do you finally decide that you have to leave Afghanistan for your safety?
I leave my province before leaving Afghanistan, and before the falling of the government, and I was forced to leave Makia province, which is my home province. And the story of the fall and leaving Afghanistan is very disturbing and sad, but I can say that fall of the republic happened very suddenly. In the beginning, it was said that half of the provinces would be given to the Taliban, so that the negotiations would be meaningful and faithful, fruitful. But the time when Afghanistan have 34 provinces, when the 19th and 20th province fall and give to the Taliban, all the people argue in very difficult and dangerous situation. So our province, after another, one province is fall after another, and there were no officials anywhere, and Taliban just come to the empty places, and Taliban came and took over everywhere. So some first and second degree officials. This is an important point that I want to mention. That how this fall happened. Some first and second degree Afghan government officials said that they have been contacted by the Americans and also for them to hand over the governorship and command to the Taliban without any resistance. So it was really brutal. People were completely terrified. I was at home that day, and about 20 hours after the fall of our province, Makia province, Kabul also fell. So I was very shocked. I just didn't know what to do now. I was in my room, in my home, and completely, I just didn't know what to do. So the day after the 2 days after the fall happened, I made an email to some of the humanitarian institutions, and I wrote them that I'm a journalist, I'm an investigative reporter, and now I'm in a complete and direct threat. So I asked them for help, and after staying for a few days in some other places, I could not be there anymore because I realized that they are looking for me. Excuse me, just give me to complete this program.
Sure, I'm just going to
of my talking.
I'm just going to stop you there, just because I want to leave enough time for Makia and Mohammed to talk about their escape as well. Okay, we'll come back. Makia, if you could pick up where Shakor left off. You said earlier that it all ended in one day, and something like 80% of Afghan women journalists lost their jobs. So tell us your story. You're a successful woman journalist. You're even a boss, a manager. What happens to you, and why do you have to leave Afghanistan? Oh, you have to unmute.
Problems.
There you go.
Okay. Before I said I didn't believe that the Taliban came and captured the Kabul. I never believed, like my other colleagues, other people, because I think the Taliban never came to Kabul and entered to Kabul. But it's happened. And I have fled from the Taliban because I have a lot of reports against them. And also I write a lot of things in Facebook against them every day. And sometimes my colleagues said to me, don't write these things about the Taliban because they are very near and they will come to Kabul and will take the Kabul. I say, no, I don't believe that Taliban come and take the Kabul. I believe to our army and our governor and our president, but unfortunately that's happened, and our president escaped and other things. I am fled from the Taliban because I worked at different international media and also local media, and also the federation members of journalists' name was at the list of the Taliban, including me. And also I worked for Voice of America. And it's, yes, and it's very dangerous for me when the Taliban come to Kabul. Our director said to me and other my colleagues, please stop your working and you must stay at their home. So sometimes I change my place because I afraid when the Taliban come to some home and they arrest some things and took something, someone. So I was in home and never go to the other place and out of the door. And sometimes I change my place and go to the south of Kabul and other place. So it was very difficult for me to accept that how I will go to the out of the Kabul. I afraid how to go to the airport. I could to left Kabul at the first days that Taliban come to Kabul, but I afraid how to come to the airport. And it was very difficult to me because I have a VOA card. I got with them, and also I got an email from the American embassy and also Canadian embassy. They want me to come to the airport and we will take you and your family. But I couldn't because the Taliban was near the airport, and also after the airport, the explosion in the airport that happened there, I afraid more and more. It will happen some things for me or for my family, because we are a media family. My brother is a journalist, my sister is a journalist. So when the flight stops in Afghanistan, I stay at home, but my director said, we will took you and your colleagues from Afghanistan as soon as possible. But I got an email from Canadian, as I said before you, but they couldn't take me from the Kabul airport because the flight was stopped, and I got an email from them, we will took you to Pakistan and you must come from the borders, Turkhan borders. I say, no, I couldn't. I afraid from the Taliban, they will arrest me and other things. I really fear from the Taliban and for their torture and beating and other things. So I waiting for them. The other office that I worked with them for a few years as a news manager, they took me to Pakistan by air. And after, yes, and after that, I left Pakistan and came to Canada. But it was not easy for me because I had a few trips to the Europe before the Taliban came at the last years, but I never wanted to stay at that countries because I want.
Makia,
yes.
Let me just, sorry to interrupt you there, but let's just leave it there for now because you made it to Canada. We'll look at the future in a minute. This is just a good time after hearing from Shakor and Makia, how both of you escaped narrowly with your lives, to bring in Rachel Pulfer, who's been standing by patiently. And Rachel was swept up, as all of us were, in the events of August 2021. So Rachel, take us back to those crazy long nights and what you and journalists in Canada were doing to help people like Makia and Shakor, and directly people like Mohammed.
Sure. Thank you so much, Julian, and thank you, Shakor, Mohammed, and Makia, for sharing so fulsomely your experiences, which you do, I know, at considerable risk to yourselves and to the family that are left in Afghanistan. So thank you for your engagement here. Journalists for Human Rights is an international media development organization based in Toronto. And ordinarily, we focus our efforts on training and capacity building. Julian has been a trainer with us. He worked on our Syria program, for example, and we usually work in Africa, the Middle East, and also here in Canada. And ironically, we weren't working in Afghanistan before this crisis, but a wonderful woman named Kira Nazish, who runs the Coalition for Women in Journalism, reached out in early August, and she told me we're facing a situation where an entire media sector is likely to be at significant risk, and that it would be an all hands on deck situation to get journalists to safety. So I then spoke with others who were already involved, including Brent Jolly and Michelle Shepard of CAJ and CJFE, respectively, and with Julian and others, and realized that there was something useful that JHR could do here. We could use our organizational capacity to help coordinate, fundraise, and bring our organizational knowledge of how to operate in war zones to bear on getting as many journalists and human rights defenders and their families safely out of Afghanistan as possible.
And very briefly, Rachel, what were some of the things you did? Because you actually brought, you helped bring some of the people here. So it wasn't just sending emails and press releases. Just tell us briefly some of the things you did to save some of these journalists.
Well, there were many 3 a.m. phone calls about which I was teased roundly at our gala last year, including 3 a.m. phone calls to our immigration minister, to Masai Ujiri, and various other people to get them to help. And I have to say, a sobering fact in all of this is that only about 1% of refugees globally ever get resettled. And so in light of that fact, and given the tall odds that people like Shakor and Makia and Mohammed faced after the fall of Kabul, we've had incredible good fortune. Working with a coalition of concerned journalists, including you, Julian, Michael Petru, Melissa Fung, Michelle Shepard, Nala Ayed, Carol Off, Lisa Laflamme, Colin Fries, Mark McKinnon, David Walmsley, and many others. We've been able to evacuate and permanently resettle 190 journalists, human rights defenders, and their family members since August. 20 more have G numbers and are just waiting to come to Canada. An additional 210 have been safely and legally evacuated using the private resources we raised and are in third countries awaiting asylum options from a variety of places. Unfortunately, 89 remain stuck in Afghanistan of our original list, and this list includes Bismillah Watandost, who I know you've been in constant contact with today and have been championing, and several other high-risk people whom we have flagged to IRCC in Canada. But one of the challenges is documents. Many of the high-risk people, including Bismillah, either don't have passports themselves or they wish to travel with family members who do not have passports. And we have asked IRCC if it is possible to issue single-use travel documents to support those who have been identified as eligible for Canada who are actively being pursued by Taliban. And we have evidence that a number of the people on our lists are actively still being pursued by Taliban. And we have been told a flat no to that. At the same time, such paper has been recently issued at scale for Ukrainians fleeing conflict. And so we're hoping that IRCC can actually standardize its approach across both crises, given the urgent need of both populations.
We should say the Canadian government, Mohammed and Makia are in Canada. Canadian government promised to resettle 40,000 refugees, and so far we're only up to 10,000. And they insist that journalists, brave journalists like Makia and Mohammed, are not directly considered eligible. You manage to make it through other means, because you haven't worked directly for the Canadian military or the Canadian government. So you have to try other measures. And luckily, people like Makia and Mohammed made it here. We're going to go to questions shortly, but I want to end, I think from the audience, you've heard from Mohammed, Shakur, and Makia about their brave work before the Taliban came back, their exposures of corruption, and even some of the violence caused by the Taliban, the risks they all took as journalists. And then, of course, they had to flee in the last year or so as the Taliban swept back to power. Let me very quickly, for a minute or two, each of you, starting with Makia, for the future. What are you hearing now, Makia, about your friends and your colleagues who are still working as or trying to work as journalists in Afghanistan? What is the future for the people we have left behind?
Yes,
Why don't you start, Makia?
First, I must say some things for Julian and Heather, your colleagues. Like our colleagues from Canada said, they talk a lot of people from Afghanistan, a lot of journalists from Afghanistan to Canada. But still, I want to just talk for 1 minute about it.
Absolutely.
But now still there are some journalists, they are under threat, under risk of the Taliban, and they still live in Afghanistan. Every time they contact with us, they message to me and wants to me what we do here. Every time the Taliban limiting more and more for us, and we don't know what we do. We face for financial problem, has also security problems, and some of them change their places every week, every month, and after a few days. I say you, for example, one of my colleagues, a journalist, a best journalist of Afghanistan that live in one of the east of province in Afghanistan. They are still in Kabul and they escaped from his province with his family. He lives in a basement, a very bad basement in Kabul, because he haven't any money to take a good room or just one room for his family. I give a list of this correspondents, this reporters, this journalists that are under risk. I think I talked this list 4 or 5 months ago. Before that, I came to Canada. I was in Pakistan for the JHR and CWA. So they take this journalist from Afghanistan to Canada or the other country. So they are under the risk. They want to leave. They must be leave. And when the Taliban, one day they will find them, they will kill them. I believe to this, because they are the real journalists. They reported against the Taliban, and they were in different provinces on Afghanistan. But now they are in Kabul, in different side of in Kabul, and or the other province, they change the province and they hide. I want to this organization, please you some decision and decided to take this journalist from Afghanistan. They are very under risk and they will and the Taliban will kill them one day, I believe, and that because last time one of my colleagues message me, Miss Makia, now I am in Kabul. What should I do? What should I do for my family? What can I do for me? Please take me from Afghanistan. I said, I gave you your list to the organization, but I know what is the matter. There is some problems on fundraising and other things. They couldn't to take them. What I say to them, they are very problem, security problem, financial problem, and I hope your decision, your Canadian organization and Canadian government decision about this journalist to take them. I agree with them if all journalists left Afghanistan work for Afghanistan. But I say The journalist was under arrest, mass to leave Afghanistan. I come for your question. Can you repeat your question?
Well, I think you answered it already, Makia. The way you talk, you answered it fine. You just talked about how people you know, people you are in contact with right now, you are worried they will be killed. Their lives are in danger. They're hiding in Kabul.
Yes,
I think you said it.
Yes.
I think you and you know, I think Rachel and I and many others here, you know, share that frustration where we're desperate to help people. We get texts and emails every night, every day, and people who are stranded, and it's really frustrating getting our government to act. Let me just hear very briefly from Mohammed. What are you hearing from your friends who are in Afghanistan still, your journalist friends? What is the situation they are facing right now?
Thank you, Julian, for asking this question. It's very important. Most of my friends, they are living in the Paktika, east of Afghanistan, like Kunar, Jalalabad, and north of Afghanistan, and also south. All of them, most of them, they are bad situation. They don't have good life, and they face big problem. But two families, they are in big danger. And I request from Rachel and you to help with them. One is one couple, husband and wife. Both of them, they were journalists. They had a woman magazine, and their home looted. The current government people, and they are in Kabul now, in very high place in their relatives' home. Even they don't have money to feed themselves. And one of their son, he escaped by chance. He is in the United States, but his children and this couple, they are living in Kabul. Every week, they call me, they telling me, please help with me. I am telling them, yes, I will try. This is one. The second family, they are the Jojo brother, Sadiq. You know him. Obviously, you know. 100%.
Yes.
He's in Quetta now. He's not a good condition.
Yes, and that's I'll just sum it up briefly.
Families that
that's right.
Yes, they are bit.
That's right, and it's just an example. This is a man who helped journalists, made it to Pakistan, and is now having bureaucratic and the runaround from the embassy in Islamabad. So I've been working with him and with Mohammed for months. So even when you manage to get out and you're in Pakistan, it is like impossible to make some headway. Briefly, Shakor, you have a lot of contacts still in Afghanistan. What are you hearing from journalists, your friends who are still there? What are the dangers they face? Shakor, looks like you froze a bit. Well, Shakor may have, his connection may have frozen, hard to tell. We're going to go to questions in a minute. We have a few lined up, and if anybody in the audience has more questions, please post them in the Q&A section, and Ange will read them to us. Let me just, while we're waiting possibly for Shakor to unfreeze, Rachel, talk a bit about that frustration. The calls you get. Oh, wait a minute. Looks like we may have got Shakor back. Shakor, are you back? Your video froze. If you could just unmute yourself, and for a minute or two, what are you hearing from your friends in Afghanistan? What are the dangers they now face as journalists there?
Yeah, one thing is clear, that there is no future for media and freedom of expression in Afghanistan in such situation in the Taliban regime. Everything is censored, 100% censored, and every day those who speak about the real situation, what's going on there in Afghanistan, are imprisoned and tortured, and we have its daily news. In this situation, if this situation continues for a few more weeks, I hope it's not. But if it continues, we will not have any coverage from Afghanistan anymore, and we will go back to the time before 2001 when Afghanistan was completely in the dark, because there is about more than 20% of the media blocked now, and the rest are completely censored. Even the Taliban are working and trying with Pakistani experts to block or limit the social media as well, Facebook, Twitter, more. They're working on it now.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, one thing is mentionable that I wanna have a little max on that. When the Ukraine crisis happened, one of the people who were more unhappy and sorry for that was Afghans, because the Afghans know better the war, the destruction of the wars, and the crises and the problems and the challenges of the war. But today, we are unhappy for Ukraine. We are so sorry for Ukraine. We are praying they have their negotiations successful as soon as possible. But unfortunately, when the Ukraine crisis happened, Afghanistan forget completely. And now Taliban abuses this situation, have increased their civics, their crimes so a lot. And today I spoke to two of my colleagues, reporters in Afghanistan. They said, we are dumb. We are just for safety. If we say anything, so tomorrow we will be in prison and we will be under the torture, and there will be no one to come and take us back and told the Taliban that they are innocent. So it's a completely unclear and so wide situation there.
Well, I think you said it, all of you, but Shakor, the way you summed it up and the way you ended it, it's on a quite dark note, but a very realistic note, I'm afraid. And I'm glad you also brought up that while all of us are, of course, shocked and horrified by what's going on in the war in Ukraine, you could see how it has, I think in many ways, we already turned our backs on the people and the journalists of Afghanistan, but especially since the war in Ukraine, it's gotten even worse. And I hope this panel will help correct that. Let's turn to some questions. We have some questions.
I want to add, I think,
sure.
Yes. Last time, one of my colleagues from one of a province put message to me and talk with me on WhatsApp, and he said the Taliban said to the journalists at that province, you don't publish anything without to coordinate with us the report. You must coordinate the report and the news before with us, with the official of this province. After that, we can cover it and report it from your media. And it's a very difficult thing for the journalists because they censor all of things. The Taliban censor all of things, the news, the reports, and the other programs. And they started it, but day by day it's become more and more, and they had a lot of things for the media. And also, one of my colleagues that he also worked with my organization, and now he is in Kabul. The Taliban killed two brothers last years, young brothers. But now they said to their relative and their friends, please find this man for us and bring for us. He escaped from his province to the Kabul, and now I am in Kabul. Last, I think, 2 nights ago, he put a message for me that now I am in Kabul, and the Taliban said to one of my relatives, please find him and bring for us. He lives in his province, but not at his home. He leave the other place and hide at his province. And also to my colleagues, to my journalist colleagues now in Pakistan, two women that they work in different media like BBC and other my colleagues in Khalid and other radios work. They are now in Pakistan and they escaped from the Taliban, and they are live in a bad financial situation and have a bad financial situation. And other things, one, like Mohammed said about the journalist colleagues have problem, one of the more our colleagues that they are from the East Province. I don't take the name of this province, maybe Mohammed know him. They also escaped from the Taliban to Kabul. The Taliban 2 months ago, 2 months or 3 months ago, arrested them and tortured them, and he was in the jail for a few days. But after that, they escaped from that when the Taliban free him and our colleagues. He go to the Kabul. Now he is in Kabul but hide. Unfortunately, in an explosion, he also injured in Kabul 2 months or 3 months ago after the torture the Taliban him. It's a bad situation. It's a story of a bad situation of Afghan journalists that, as you said, and your colleagues said, the Taliban started a war against the journalists and against the media in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Makia. Thank you all. All right, we're going to go to questions. We may not have time for all of them, but Ange will read a question from the audience, and we'll get one or more of you to answer. So, Ange, over to you. What's the first question?
Yeah, the first question is from Chris. Chris asks, with the greater prominence of women journalists starting in 2001, what stories started being told in Afghanistan that had not been told before?
Okay, let's have Makia answer that. Makia, very briefly, because we don't have much time. So the question was, when you and other women started taking a strong role in the media, what stories did you do that weren't being told before? What stories did women journalists tell in ways that the men journalists were not doing? Give us some examples.
Yes. As you know, the woman has a lot of difficulties in Afghanistan. The women, they work in the different offices in Afghanistan or at the war. More women try to cover and prepare reports from the women that have difficult from the families and to their families, and secure home. The women are in the secure home and house, and they are living in that secure housing. They published and they prepare and they cover these reports more. And I think when the women cover reports then the men couldn't yet, very clear, because the women could to talk with the women very clear. And they tell all of them to a woman, but they don't want to tell them for a men reporters or a men correspondent or a men journalists. So the women work very useful for the women journalists, for very useful work for women that they have more difficulties in Afghanistan and have problem in the different section in Afghanistan. And also they have a lot of programs for women. And it is very useful for women and that who lived in different provinces of Afghanistan.
Thank you.
So now, but we haven't this program in the media, not in TV, not in radio, and not in print media.
That's right. And I think it's important to realize that up until 2021, Afghanistan was arguably better than its neighbors, Pakistan or India, in the role of women journalists. When I was there, you turn on the TV, there were women anchors, women reporters, women investigative reporters. There was a women's only TV network. So in many ways, that flowering was quite remarkable. Good question, Chris. Next, Ange.
The next question is from Marcus. Marcus asks, as journalists in Afghanistan after the early 2000s, did you face censorship from the Americans, British, or Canadians?
Okay. Shakor, you're good on that. So we've talked a lot about the Taliban, but what kind of censorship did you face from the Western armed forces?
I think in the first, when you asked me, I just remain incomplete.
Yeah.
There were three sides that we have challenged from over and the government. The second was the Taliban, and the third were the external forces and the units. They were supporting them directly. I have one of the I think a good and close example. Close mean I was in Paktia province, and the Paktia was the center of the southeast zone. We have 4 provinces there, and one of them was Khost. Khost and Paktia was is neighbor provinces, and there is American were based in Khost. Some of the American trainers and were there, and also they have a very direct supported units called KPF. So we lost 2 journalists, and both of them killed from these units, which are supported directly from external forces. One is was Khairuddin Khairkhwa, and another was Ahmad Shah from BBC. Ahmad Shah was working on the external forces armed attacks on civilians, on the civilians' homes at the night, and he was the second guy and our friend that we lost him in this way.
Wow.
So
thank you for that.
you can think about the censorship and the pressure from them from this example.
All right. Good question again, and good answer. And next question.
Yeah, the next question is from Mohammed. Mohammed says, first, thank you, everyone. And then to my Afghan folks, Afghanistan made great achievements for the last 20 years in areas of freedom of speech and media. How do you forecast the role of the media in Afghanistan with current restrictions, torture, and oppression? And how do you give voices to those voiceless people from Afghanistan?
I think Shakor answered a bit quite well. Well, all of you did, but Shakor at the end, when you talked about how dark it was and the censorship. But Shakor, let me take the last part of that question from Mohammed. We know how bad the situation is now, the censorship. Makia, you were talking about it as well, how the Taliban is exerting complete control. We all have friends who are in hiding or have been arrested. But what about, how do we give voice to the voiceless, Shakor? How do you said that you were worried a dark time was coming, that no news would come out of Afghanistan. So how do we get the news out of Afghanistan? How do we hear from the people of Afghanistan?
Asking me or Mohammed?
To you.
Yeah. We were, if I get your question directly, that you mean how we cover the voice of the voiceless people?
No, well, right now in April 2022, you said it's a dark time. Yeah. There's censorship. You said there's going to be no news. So how do you see going forward in the next few months, how will news come out of Afghanistan? How can we get news from Afghanistan? What is going to happen?
I think one of the only or near close to the only solution is to talk about Afghanistan and the international community to fulfill its hypothetical responsibility to a nation of 40 million. And that is to build a comprehensive government and pressure and have lots of pressure on Taliban to make them and to present them to this, that they accept, yes, we accept the freedom of expression. If the international community didn't put pressure on them, there is no any way. The journalist itself or alone journalist cannot bring the Taliban to that stage that you should accept the freedom of expression. It's not possible if we have this except from the Taliban, that Taliban will say, yeah, it's okay. We will reopen the media because there is pressure from the JHR, from the IFJ, from the journalists. No, the only way is international community, and I'm so sorry that international community is failed yet to bring Taliban to this stage and to present them to the stage that they must accept the freedom of the expression. So now, as I'm covering some issues from Afghanistan. People and journalist friends call me or message me somehow, and so in her situation. So we are talking here to international media. So I think briefly, if I say just in one sentence, if international community and the UN and the other governments didn't, the Taliban regime to a responsible government and comprehensive and return the public. So I don't think so it's possible to Taliban accept the freedom of speech.
Okay, well put. Next, Ange.
Yeah, the next question is it's actually come from a few people, but Barbara asked it as well. How could the Canadian government do more to help endangered Afghani journalists? What can individual Canadians do? Is it likely that more pressure on the Canadian government will make a difference to our government's actions?
Could I say something about that?
Absolutely, Mohammed.
Okay, thank you. Taking journalists from Afghanistan, this is good way, but this will have bad effects. On one side, that you are leaving the population of Afghanistan without to transfer their voice to the world. It's impossible for foreign agencies or foreign governments to take all the journalists to foreign countries. Now the big challenge is the security of your jobs. Most of the journalists, they lost their jobs and they face the hunger. Most of the journalists, they are telling me that if the Taliban don't kill us, maybe the hunger will kill us. So that's the Rachel asked some question. That's what the Canadian government do about that. If they support economically until they decide what should they do about their life, what they should do to speak with the Taliban, to convince the Taliban to leave them to do the job. I think we will support the journalists. They are working mostly, they are working with the foreign media, or they were working with the foreign media. So to hear from the people that we don't have any device to know what the Afghan people are telling us, asking us. Only one source we have, these are the journalists. Mm-hmm. I think if you support them economically, especially economically, and also to put some pressure on Taliban to leave them to continue your job.
Very well put. I can't stress enough about what my friend and colleague Mohammed just said, that as Shakor pointed out, and Makia, the international community has failed Afghanistan and the Afghan people. And I'm going to ask Rachel in a minute about what Canadians specifically can do to pressure the government to do more to help journalists. But you know, as Mohammed just said, Afghanistan has lost the bravery and courage of people like Makia and Shakor. They are no longer there. And while it's very important we rescue as many journalists and women leaders and others who want to leave, in the end, there are tens of millions of people who are going to stay in Afghanistan must stay in Afghanistan, and they deserve not only freedom from starvation and freedom of liberty and especially freedom for women, but they deserve a free press. We must do everything we can so the journalists there not only can report for their people, but for us. Otherwise, we won't know what's going on. And this was our war. Canada and the Western countries were heavily involved, and we created a lot of the issues there. Very briefly, though, Rachel, the question was specifically, what can the ordinary citizen do to try to pressure, and let's specifically talk about Canada, but I guess other countries as well.
So ordinary citizens have already done an enormous amount and have shown considerable appetite in poll after poll to do more. Canadians care a great deal about Afghans and Afghanistan and want to be supportive, and we've seen lots of evidence of that. We are currently working to set up a framework of private sponsorship for those Afghan journalists and human rights defenders on our lists who do not have a solution yet, do not have asylum in any country. And we have been told that private sponsorship is one way that we can work to get them to Canada. And we've seen real appetite for that amongst people who support JHR and people who are part of the network of concerned journalists who supported this effort to evacuate journalists and human rights defenders from Afghanistan. So that's one way. And private sponsorship is simply stepping up to help organize the funds, and then also the sort of facilitation of bringing someone to Canada and supporting them over the course of a year. It's not a small endeavor, I will be clear, but it is something concrete and material, and we know that it is a path that can work to bring Afghans here safely and legally. It takes a long time, but it is one path, one way to plug into this effort. Another way is to continue to keep this issue on the radar, share concern about Afghanistan on social media, ask journalists to keep covering what's going on in Afghanistan. The situation has only gotten more urgent. Last week, the Taliban backtracked on their promise to allow girls to attend secondary school, for example. Women activists have had their passports taken away. Women are being required to have chaperones in order to leave Afghanistan. Taliban are requiring clear rationales for why people might want to leave Afghanistan. So paying attention to this issue and putting pressure on social media in order to keep the issue on the radar and ensure that we don't lose sight of our responsibilities to those who served with Canada and those who supported Canada through one of our longest overseas conflicts. Also, just to put a spotlight on the question of the government of Canada, Canada has shown that it can act with agility and compassion. This was the case both in Syria, in the case of the Syrian refugee transfer to Canada, and then also now with Ukraine. And so what we call for is a more uniform response for both Ukraine and Afghanistan. Much has been said about the special relationship that Canada has with Ukraine, and it's very true. There are millions of Ukrainian Canadians, and there is a great interest in supporting those who are fleeing that terrible war currently, and they deserve all our support, as Shakor said. However, there is also a special relationship with Afghanistan. Canada was involved with Afghanistan for many, many years. There are Afghans on our list currently who served with the Canadian Armed Forces, who wore the uniform. There are Afghans who serve Global Affairs Canada, who have taken bullets for Canadians and have been decorated for that. Those people deserve our help. They deserve our support. And right now they're in danger, and that means stepping up and helping them however we can. If this could be issuing single-use travel paper to those without documents, which has been a response that has been deployed in the Ukrainian case, but apparently was not possible in the Afghan case. This could be providing more short-term visas to travel to Canada for a shorter-term stay. This has been made available for Ukrainians. They're not actually called refugees when they come here. They're visitors. Many Afghans who we have been working with tell us, we don't necessarily want to come to Canada forever, but we do not want to be out of harm's way currently. And so why can't we react to their needs with the same kind of agility and compassion that we're seeing in some other cases? So essentially, and as I'm not saying Ukrainians face many other challenges, And we're currently working with the Ukrainian World Congress to try and figure out what's the best way to support these various efforts. But in short, ensuring that the issue stays on the radar, ensuring that people understand the urgency, ensuring that people are engaging with their MPs and with their government, and calling for more opportunities for Afghans to come to Canada in different ways, not just as permanent resourced refugees. I mean, that's great. It's great that the government has wanted to do that, but it's expensive, it's slow. And as we saw with the case of Bismillah Watandost, 6 months ago, you predicted that he'd be detained by Taliban. This past week, he was detained by Taliban. And, you know, we don't have the luxury of time when it comes to people like these people who are high risk.
We have time for one last question. Ange?
Yeah, the last question. What does the future of media look like in Afghanistan? And is there a future?
I think to some degree we've all addressed that, but let me give I'm going to give you 30 seconds because that's all we have. Makia, what do you see as the future of the media in Afghanistan?
Yes,
30 seconds.
When the Taliban continues this censor, this limiting, and also the beating, arresting, and torture of Afghan journalists, I will think the media situation of Afghanistan become bad every day and every week. And from the August, we 50% of media stop their workings, their published, 50%. And their broadcasting, 50%. And 30% will stop their working at the near next weeks or months because they face for financial problems and also security problems and censor because they haven't any money to take to their colleagues, and also a lot of journalists left their jobs, and it's a big worries and disasters for Afghan journalists, for us as Afghan journalists to left our countries. 80 journalists from the 15th of August, after the 15th of August, arresting, tortured, and beating by the Taliban. And it's a big number from the 15th of August to now. 80% women journalists now jobless and in their homes and left their homes, and some of the journalists left their countries. It's a big worry for all of us. I think when the Taliban continue this situation and the violence against the journalists, against the media, I will think one day will arrive that all media stop their working in Afghanistan.
Oh. All right. Well, I hate to end it on such a dark note, but I think it's appropriate. We're talking about a dark time, and we've heard from three of the bravest journalists that I know. Let me turn it back. Let me turn it back to Jim Turk, and he will tell you how you can continue to stay in touch, and there'll be resources posted on the website where you could find out more about how you can help the people of Afghanistan. Thank you all. Over to you, Jim.
Well, Julian, I want to thank the panelists too. We have three very heroic and important journalists. We're grateful indeed that you took the time to be with us today. And your messages were so important, and what you shared with us was so important. I want to thank Rachel, and I want to thank Julian for having done a wonderful job. I do have a quick question for Julian, however, before I finish. Your documentary that Ghost of Afghanistan won the award, could you just tell the audience very briefly what it's about and where they could see it?
Sure. Ghost of Afghanistan was made by Gala Film in Montreal for TVO, TV Ontario in Canada, and other networks. We had the great support of Mohammed, and there's even a few scenes where you'll see him in the taxi or driving with us and keeping us safe. It follows Graham Smith, who Mohammed talked about. Graham Smith was one of Canada's best foreign correspondents, and he covered the war differently than most Western journalists because he let the Afghan people speak, Afghan women speak, Afghan farmers speak, and he didn't believe the myths that we were told. This was the good war, and there were no mistakes being made, we were told, by the Canadian government and the Western forces. And Graham risked his lives to talk to the Taliban, to expose corruption and torture. And what our movie, it's called The Ghost of Afghanistan because he goes back, and there are no Western experts, there are no politicians speaking. It's just the people of Afghanistan, women, human rights leaders, telling us about their dreams and hopes and the future of their country as the Taliban was about to retake control. You can watch it on YouTube unfortunately in Canada only. So it's called Geofence. So if go into YouTube and put Ghost of Afghanistan, or you go to my page, julianshare.com, there's a link to it. And you could watch it in Canada. If anybody is listening from abroad and you do want to see it, email me directly. My email will be on the webpage, and I will try to make arrangements. For example, I'm speaking tomorrow at a conference in Belgrade by Zoom, where it's being shown in Belgrade. I think the most important thing is we don't want more Ghosts of Afghanistan. I'm writing a story in tomorrow's Globe and Mail, which you'll be able to read online. And for too long, we have ignored the people of Afghanistan. In many ways, we ignored them for the 20 years we were there, and we continue to ignore them. So it's a movie about our responsibilities and how the people of Afghanistan are fighting for their future, and we need to support what they're doing. So I hope that helps, Jim.
It does indeed, and I certainly am looking forward to seeing it myself. I haven't seen it, and I hope others in the audience will see it. Now, as Julian mentioned, a video of this panel discussion will be posted on the Center for Free Expression website tomorrow, along with a list of resources. So if you want to know more about what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening to journalists in Afghanistan, the link to the YouTube video of Julian's documentary, it'll all be there. And our website is cfe.ryerson.ca. So I want to thank the panelists again, and I want to thank the audience. Our next event is going to be 2 weeks from today. It's going to be a presentation of the Peter Bryce Prize, which is a prize that the Center for Free Expression has created that goes to a Canadian whistleblower to recognize a person who's had the courage to speak up about something, about wrongdoing that affects the public and that the public needs to know about. And so we're going to announce who the recipient of that is. That'll be 2 weeks from today at 4 p.m. The details again are on our website. And the event after that is going to be an event that has a panel discussing how the regulation of private sector businesses in Canada is often captured by those businesses so that the public doesn't have an effective way of controlling them. The title of it is Corporate Rules, the Real World of Business Regulation in Canada. And it's also going to be a launch of a book by the same title, and several of the contributors to that book will be part of the panel. So all that information is on the Center for Free Expression website, cfe.ryerson.ca. Thank you so much for coming today. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone.